The universe held its breath in anticipation. Every move made by Glorvan, a young and promising diplomat of the Human Federation, carried the weight of centuries of hopes and frustrations. He had just been approved to join a historic delegation, the definitive meeting with the first alien species with whom his civilization had been negotiating for generations. The air around him seemed to pulse with tension. Why had it taken so many eras to reach an agreement? And what secrets could be hidden in the subtleties of such a delay? These unsettling questions swirled in his mind as he prepared for the decisive moment. In the silence of the ship's metallic corridor, doubt gripped him. Why had it taken so long to adapt the human vessel? Simple, alien technology required unimaginable modifications to terrestrial standards. But would the effort be worth it? Certainly, as it would guarantee not only coexistence but also an exchange of knowledge that could transform humanity forever. Crossing the threshold as the door slid open with a soft electronic hum, Glorvan felt a chill run down his spine. It was here that he would pursue the realization of his ancestors' dreams. In the center of the room floated a long holographic table, glowing softly with star maps and technological diagrams. At the back of the room, Orvith, the veteran of the delegation, muttered quietly to himself. "Imagine, it took them 8 whole cycles to adjust this ship for our guests," he commented reproachfully. "With all due respect, sir," Glorvan replied with a restrained smile, "perhaps our machinery isn't as swift as theirs, but it carries the precision of our principles." The elder glanced sideways at him and fell silent for a moment. Glorvan knew that day could mark the beginning of a new era or the collapse of centuries of effort. With his heart racing, he took his first step toward the unknown. The pale glow of the room's lights reflected off the metallic walls as Glorvan watched the alien delegates enter. The tension was palpable, but there was something fascinating about the details of this encounter. The few pieces of alien technology that had been shared with humanity in the past had been studied extensively. Though not miraculous in function, their systems demonstrated a bewildering complexity, an almost artistic engineering that defied earthly logic. "Ah, welcome, delegates," said a robust human figure, rising from his chair at the center of the room. The alien group hesitated for a moment, as if needing an instant to adjust to the sight before them. Their reports had described humans with characteristics similar to their own, but the man before them was imposing, nearly twice the height of most of them. An evident failure in the data analyses that would undoubtedly have repercussions for their intelligence team. "I see your doors weren't designed to impress visitors with grandeur," muttered one of the elder delegates, his tone laden with disdain. Glorvan narrowed his eyes at the comment but remained silent, attentive to the initial exchange. The elder alien's sharp words were no surprise. He had learned from reports that this species valued direct communication, often bordering on rudeness. "I hope we can conclude these negotiations today," Glorvan continued, his voice firm but polite. "It has been many generations since our peoples began this process, and there is widespread anticipation back home for trade to finally commence." The elder alien stared at him, his piercing gaze seeming to assess every word. "Yes, we could have concluded this decades ago if your species weren't so meticulous," he replied, laced with mild irony. The words hung in the air for a moment, laden with meaning. Glorvan knew that although there was irritation on the delegate's part, there was also respect for human patience. After all, at that moment, every move and word could shape the future of their civilizations. If you are as intrigued as Glorvan by the secrets behind these negotiations, just imagine what else might be hidden beyond the stars. Don't miss the unfolding of this story, where each dialogue carries clues to something much bigger. Leave your comment, do you believe we may be facing an even more surprising truth? The silence between the two sides was broken by a timid smile from the human representative, who nodded respectfully before speaking. I apologize for the delays. It took longer than we expected to adapt certain parts of our ship to better suit your species' needs. He paused, as if reflecting on the magnitude of the moment. I was just a child when you arrived in our system. Today, I finally see our race taking an important step on the galactic stage. The alien delegates maintained their composure, but some exchanged discreet glances, acknowledging the weight of his statement. A soft glow emanated from the data devices as the human activated them with a gesture. In an instant, a holographic screen appeared in the center of the room, displaying a detailed list of provisions and previously negotiated clauses. We have prepared all the documents you requested, the human added, pointing to the screen. Finally, murmured Glorvan, allowing himself a faint smile as he reviewed the data. However, a specific line caught his attention, causing his expression to harden. Excuse me, Representative, but what are these figures here? He asked, pointing at the display. The human leaned forward, examining the indicated section. Ah, those are the conversion data, he began, but was interrupted by the eldest alien in the group. Data? The veteran delegate shot back, his tone laden with skepticism. The progress seems misaligned. Do you measure time differently than we do? The human hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. It's likely. Our worlds have distinct cultural and scientific foundations. It makes sense that our metrics would differ. The elder alien furrowed his brow, contemplating the explanation. After a few moments, he marked the document with a digital icon, signaling his approval. The other members of the group followed suit, one by one. Perfect, said Glorvan, feeling a subtle relief as the agreements advanced. Yet, he knew the real challenge was only beginning. The differences between the two species wouldn't be resolved with mere signatures. With this, I believe we can begin our celebration, announced the human with a serene smile. He walked over to a wall and activated an embedded device with a gentle touch. Almost instantly, machines around the room began serving trays filled with Earth's delicacies. The alien delegation members, initially hesitant, approached cautiously and began sampling the food and drinks offered. Meanwhile, Glorvan stood still, his attention drawn to the large window displaying a magnificent view of the crimson orb that was his home planet. There was something hypnotic about the way its red glow seemed to pulse in the dark expanse of space. He knew this view, once reserved for a select few, would soon become a common privilege among his people. A magnificent view, isn't it? Asked the human diplomat, approaching Glorvan. Yes, it's incredible, Glorvan replied, his voice tinged with admiration. The human continued, his gaze fixed on the window. I still remember the first time we arrived here. It was extraordinary to see the lights of your cities illuminating the planet at night. You mean, your ancestors? Glorvan asked, confused. Oh no. I was part of the team that conducted the initial surveys of this world. Glorvan's jaw dropped slightly as he tried to process the statement. But, that was about 100 plokos ago. He exclaimed, his voice echoing through the room. The celebration came to a halt. All eyes were now on him, including those of his own colleagues. The abrupt comment had broken diplomatic protocol, something unthinkable for someone in his position. Realizing his mistake, Glorvan closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before turning back to the human. I must apologize for my reaction, he said, bowing his head in respect. It was not my intention to disrupt this moment. The human simply smiled, but there was something in his eyes that Glorvan couldn't decipher. As the others resumed their celebration, a shadow of doubt lingered in the air. What secret did this man carry, and how could he have been present for events so distant in time? Glorvan felt a chill, as though he had just brushed against the edge of a much greater mystery. Don't worry. Just a moment, the AI is still deciphering the term, plokos, said the human, casting a curious glance at his data list. It seems to be a word that our translation units haven't been able to interpret correctly. The AI worked silently in the background, but Glorvan felt a growing unease. To him, a ploko was an obvious measure, something any child of his species would learn in their first cycles of life. How could it possibly be a mystery to the humans? Got it! Exclaimed the humans suddenly, breaking the silence. Now I understand its meaning. Glorvan frowned, feeling almost insulted by the simplicity of the explanation. A ploko is what we call a month, he said plainly, as if clarifying something that should have been evident. A month? The human repeated thoughtfully as he processed the information. So, your species arrived here, 100 months ago? Glorvan nodded, his eyes fixed on the man in front of him. Yes. But we had to proceed cautiously, the human explained in a more serious tone. We didn't want to cause panic. We gradually contacted your governments, introduced vaccines to prevent epidemics. Everything was done with extreme care to avoid chaos. Glorvan crossed his arms, scrutinizing the man. His expression hardened upon hearing the explanation. The patience required for such an approach was understandable, but the implication that this human had been present throughout the process was disturbing. So, you must be very old, then? Glorvan asked, his voice a mix of distrust and fascination. The human let out a light laugh, but there was something in his tone that seemed to mask the seriousness of the situation. Old? Oh, boy. I feel old sometimes. But I just turned 30 months last month. The room plunged into an uncomfortable silence. Glorvan felt a chill run down his spine. 30? How could someone who appeared to be decades old claim such a thing? There were stories of species with incredibly long lives, but nothing he had read or heard had prepared him for this revelation. Something was wrong. And Glorvan knew this was only the beginning of a much more complex truth. 30? Glorvan shook his head, allowing his gaze to wander in confusion. But you said you were among those who first encountered us. The human smiled, slightly sheepish. Oh, I apologize. I meant, 30 years, not months. Glorvan heard a discreet ping from his data device, indicating an automatic conversion. 1 human year equaled approximately 12 plokos. His mind worked quickly, connecting the numbers. His eyes widened as he finished the calculation. So, you are 361 plokos old. His voice was barely a whisper. The revelation echoed through the room, leaving the alien diplomats stunned. Everyone stepped back slightly, their incredulous gazes fixed on the human. The elder delegate, usually unshakable, was visibly unsettled. You're saying this, young human is older than I am? Asked the veteran, trembling with disbelief. In Glorvan species, longevity was intimately tied to wisdom, and wisdom was the foundation of the right to rule. The idea that someone so young could be so old challenged their most fundamental notions of hierarchy and respect. Well, began the human, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. When you put it that way, I suppose so. How old are you, Glorvan? You must be relatively young. Glorvan hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on him. I would be roughly 2 of your human years. The human blinked, clearly trying to process the information. 2? Then the oldest among you would be approximately 7 of your human years, replied the elder delegate, his voice low, almost a murmur. The human leaned back slightly, visibly impressed. Wow. No wonder you kept changing the diplomats we were negotiating with. The words, though not malicious, made Glorvan shudder. He realized he was facing something far deeper and more intricate than mere diplomatic negotiations. The differences between the species went beyond language or culture, they were fundamental discrepancies in how they lived, thought, and understood time. And this was only the beginning of a truth yet to be uncovered. For a long time, we thought we were wrong, admitted the human, his tone uncertain. It seems we'll need to revise our analyses. But at the same time, it makes sense. Your species lives at such an accelerated pace, it explains your programs. Programs? Glorvan frowned. Yes. The first thing we detected about your world was transmissions we called programs. We thought it was a translation error, maybe interference. But they were real, your systems, your lives, everything operating at a rhythm almost incomprehensible to us. The words carried a weight that Glorvan felt in his chest. It was as if the human was speaking of something beyond technology, something essential to the nature of their species. Are you one of the elders of your race? Glorvan asked, trying to make sense of it. Me? The human let out a short laugh. Oh, no. I still have my grandparents. My grandmother, though more machine than human now, recently celebrated her 90th birthday. The number sounded like thunder. More than 1,000 plocos. The idea of such long lives was incomprehensible to Glorvan. So many generations for a single being, murmured one of the older alien delegates, his voice faltering. The human noticed the tension and tried to ease the moment. I guess that makes us something like elves to you. Elves? Glorvan repeated, his tone incredulous. The room plunged into an oppressive silence. For the alien delegation, longevity symbolized wisdom and dominance. The existence of such ancient beings changed everything. Yet Glorvan felt a chill. There was something about this human, something that didn't fit the simplicity of his explanation. The truth, he thought, was still hidden. But would he be strong enough to uncover it? In our world, we have stories about a legendary race called elves, began the human, his voice carrying an almost nostalgic tone. They looked like us, but they had pointed eyes and lived for millennia. The room fell silent as a ping echoed from the delegates' devices. Data began to flow, revealing the magnitude of the concept, 1,000 cycles in a single year. The information landed like a stone in the already charged atmosphere. But of course, you don't need to worry, the human continued, with a tense smile. These are just stories. Tales to entertain. Nothing more. Glimpo felt the weight of the words, but something within him refused to accept them. He stared at the human, his eyes narrowing. To us, a being who lives as long as you would be more than real. It would be a myth. A god. How can you be so sure these, elves, as you call them, don't exist? The human hesitated for a moment, his eyes briefly shifting to the window where the crimson orb glowed. When he replied, there was a touch of uncertainty in his voice. Well, I'm not absolutely certain, Glimpo. Maybe it's time we consider the possibility that space elves aren't just legends. The room grew uneasy. The human's words were like a spark in an atmosphere saturated with tension. One of the older delegates, normally calm and analytical, took a step back, as if something invisible had just crossed the room. I just hope they're not like the Eternals of Orion, the human added with a nervous laugh. But Glimpo didn't laugh. He looked back at the orb, feeling a chill run down his spine. Somewhere out there, he knew, there were mysteries that neither humans nor his own species were prepared to face. And what if the truth was closer than they imagined? The silence was shattered by a sudden alarm. The room's lights flickered, and a message appeared on everyone's devices: unknown object detected. The mysteries of the universe are just beginning to unfold, and Glorvan's journey is proof that the greatest truths lie beyond our understanding. Keep exploring with us. Because in the end, not everything we see is what we see really exists.